It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorn. My first guest is W. Kamau Bell. Now, Kamau and I go way back, like close to 20 years. When I was still doing this show at UC Santa Cruz, Kamau was a young up-and-coming comic in the Bay Area. He actually once co-hosted the show with me. I mean, for real, way back. Anyway, he's gone from hosting at the Punchline in downtown San Francisco to having specials and comedy albums and touring a bunch. In 2012, he got his own TV show, Totally Biased, with W. Kamau Bell on FX and FXX. Totally Biased was kind of a talk show, kind of a political, satirical show, too. But unlike, say, The Daily Show, Kamau wasn't really inclined to get out in front of the audience and give the man what for from his perspective. He actually let other people on staff do that. Kamau just kind of asked questions. Funny ones, serious ones, bemused ones, and that was what made the show really special. Today, he hosts another show. It's called United Shades of America. It airs on CNN. It's a great show. It's actually up for an Emmy this year in the unstructured reality programming category. Last year, he won it. And I like to think that that is because Kamau is such a wonderful host. United Shades is basically a show about asking questions, about warmly engaging with everything that the United States is. In the same way that a guy like Anthony Bourdain would travel across continents to elevate and explore the traditions of some remote cultural group, Kamau does the same thing right here in the U.S. He covers issues and people in our country who I guess you can say aren't used to getting a lot of nuanced news coverage. Folks like Sikhs, or Appalachian coal miner families, or, in this clip, inmates at San Quentin, a prison in Northern California.
What would you say is the biggest surprise? Would you think that would surprise people on the outside about being in San Quentin?
The name itself is not the characters that it produces anymore.
Yeah.
They actually produces positive people now. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
You know,
yes.
some people come in, couldn't read, write, spell. Now you walk around, they geniuses now. You know?
Yeah. Since you don't have cell phones, you need somebody to be walking around to be the computer.
Oh, yeah, ain't no doubt. Yeah.
You need somebody whose nickname is Wikipedia. So they can give you information.
Right, they keep you, aware. They make us think that we're still part of some sort of humanity. Because other than that, we just be numbers on the yard.
Yeah, numbers on the yard.
Yeah, just numbers on the yard.
What's your sentence?
Oh, I got a 7 to life.
How long you been in here?
Oh, I'm on my 40th year right now.
7 to life and you're on your 40th year?
40th year, yeah.
Wow.
Same thing I say every morning I get up.
Yeah.
Wow.
Kamau, welcome back to Bullseye. It's nice to talk to you again.
I'm glad to be here. It's been a while. Thanks for having me back on.
You're pretty much emeritus at this point.
Yes. Super senior.
The time 15 years ago when you drove to Santa Cruz to co-host the show with me, you pretty much earned a lifetime pass.
Well, you know what? I could see even back then. I was like, this guy's got something going on. So I'm gonna invest in this young man and see where it takes us.
Kamau, I have a question for you. You are one of the biggest dudes I know. Don't think you're quite as big as comedian Steve Agee, but besides that...
No, I'm not that tall. I may weigh the same, but I'm not that tall.
I think you're the second biggest dude I know. You're like what? You're like 6'4", 6'5", something like that?
I'm 6'4", in the Fletch sense, 6'6" with the afro, but I'm 6'4" if you measure into the afro. Yeah, and I'm about like, as I say, I say 250, and now I realize that was before I had kids. So yeah, I'm definitely bigger than 250 now. I'm basically Charles Barkley size when he was in his prime, not at the end, but in his prime.
You're broad-shouldered. You're not just dad-bodied. How do you think that has affected your life?
It's funny. I think there's a couple things. It's one, when I became a teenager and I hit my growth spurt, which I was like 5'10" in the 8th grade, which is tallish but not tall. But then when I got to maybe sophomore year of high school, I was like 6'1", and I think that was like suddenly I realized I was basically perceived as an adult at that point, even though I was like 14, 15 years old. I knew that in the world I was perceived as a threat by people. So I think for a lot of that means that like as a comedian, and I think this came from me in my life, first of all, I always knew how to sort of like when I met people, how to like just sort of like, okay, relax, calm down. I'm a friendly presence. Like I think that's something that I learned how to do very quickly, is sort of to let people know that even though I was gigantic, I was your friend.
Yeah, I mean, I was really struck watching the episode of your show, United Shades of America, that you shot in Mobile, Alabama, where you spent a lot of time as a kid and as a young man because your father lived there and lives there. That when you were standing next to your dad, it was insurance commissioner of the state of Alabama, and he has what I might describe as a regal bearing.
Yes, that's might be different for me. Yeah, absolutely.
And your bearing is a little bit more like mine, right? Like I'm only 6'3". I'm a little smaller than you, and I'm white, so I think my appearance carries a little less baggage. In the United States, people are a little. There's some fewer preconceptions about who I might be as a big white guy than if I was a big black guy.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, other people carry your baggage. That's what you get when you're a white guy.
But like, I think that sometimes people are like, "Why don't you stand up straighter?" And when you're this size, I think standing up straight, it kind of freaks people out.
Well, it's funny you mentioned my dad because I think my dad, he grew up in a different era than me. He was born in 1943, and I think him growing up was like, I'm going to stand up as straight as humanly possible because you will not think that you're in any way intimidating me. And I think he's growing up again in Alabama, Mobile, Alabama. So I think his standing up like stock straight is his way of saying like, I'm not even trying to be your equal. I'm trying to be your superior. And I think that's how he's led his life. Like I'm not trying to be as good as you. I'm trying to be better than you. Whereas on my side, being born in 1973, I grew up in this era of like having to maneuver through the world in a different way and also being different than my dad and going like, I can stand up straight if I need to. And me and my wife talk about that, standing to my full height. Like there's times when I will get into situations where it's like, okay, I need to stand all the way up to my full height to let this person know that I'm not intimidated by them. But to move through the world easier, I'm not going to do that because it just sort of slows things down.
What do you mean when you say it slows things down?
If you take up all the space you can in every room you're in, you're just naturally going to be taking up more space than you need to take up. Or if you realize that the amount of space you take up affects people in a negative way, and it's not that being tall is bad. I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's one of the best things you can be. We get paid more. We're better looking according to statistics. So I'm not. I love being tall, but therefore I have the option to be a little bit shorter if I slouch because it's just like. People say this to me all the time when they meet me from the show or even friends of mine. They're like, oh, you're taller than I thought. Or friends of mine haven't seen me in a while. I'll be like, I forgot how tall you were because I don't carry myself to my full height because there's a sense that being a big black guy is intimidating. And so I don't mind that. I just want to use it when I need it.
It's funny that you mentioned your dad being disappointed in you because that that episode of the show that's where you visit Mobile, where your dad lives, like that is basically the undercurrent of everything that happens in the show. I mean, at one point you're with the prancing elites and all male like step dancing team. That probably isn't about you disappointing your dad. But like all the rest of it is about you disappointing your dad. So it made me wonder like how much of your life, especially your adolescence and your early adulthood, was colored by the fact that you had a serious, stern father who was the highest ranking African-American person in the state government of Alabama. And you had a mother who literally started her own business selling books that she published of inspirational African-American quotations. Like the expectations for achievement and like level of responsibleness and so on and so forth must have been extraordinary.
I mean, the funny thing about my dad is that I think the reason why my dad was disappointed in me is because he saw me as having all the opportunities he wished he had had in his life, growing up in Mobile, Alabama, and how hard he had to work to achieve what he got. And, I think he definitely surpassed anybody's expectations of him, but he felt like he had to work a lot harder. And also, my dad, when I was born, he was not the highest ranking African-American official. He was like a college dropout who then was like, I got to clean this up. Like he basically was like, so I got to see him sort of like go through his Rocky moment of dun 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 dun, like become the guy he is now. And I think he's looking at me like, you don't have to go through all that. You don't have to be a college dropout, and you can actually just start out and just go to college, finish. I got into an Ivy League college. He was like, oh my God, your whole life is set now that you're in this Ivy League college. And then when I dropped out after a year and a half, And then a year and a half after that, I was like, I think I'm going to be a stand-up comedian. He was just like, you're wasting all of the potential you had. Like, you know, like, you're disappointing every dead black person in our family right now.
Why did you drop out of college?
I really think I was at the wrong college, and no offense to the University of Pennsylvania, but I went to that school because it was in a big city. It was a good school. It was a pretty big school, but it's really a very pre-professional school. At least it felt like it at that point. And I think I really belonged at a more like, I should have gone to Oberlin, you know, or one of those colleges where you get to grade yourself. I should have gone to one of those schools.
I want to play a clip from your show, The United Shades of America, and this is from the latest season. It's from the episode where you're in Mobile, which is where your dad lives and where you lived for part of your childhood. And the two of you are at the beach, and you're kind of looking out of the water. The water is getting kind of choppy and a little intense. And you're talking about how this isn't necessarily what people imagine when they imagine the American South. And you also talk about, you know, what it's like to be in a place where natural disaster is always waiting for you.
There is some global warming that is occurring, and that has an effect in terms of warming bodies of oceans, in terms of what's going on in the atmosphere. Climate change is a real deal. The scientists say that it is, and it's undeniable.
Yep, another Southern stereotype debunked. An older church-going Southern man who believes in climate change.
I always say there's a price you have to pay to live in paradise. And this is a little slice of paradise.
I agree with you, and it just makes me laugh to think there's people watching right now going, Alabama, a little slice of paradise.
Propaganda's finally got
He's
to
been
it.
brainwashed, he's been bamboozled, hoodwinked, led astray, run amok. This is what he does.
I think it was odd to watch this episode of the show with your dad on it because I was so used to you being a kind of cultural translator on your show that it was odd to hear you speak so directly about your own life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the only reason for me to do the show is to always be pushing myself to do new things and to also keep sort of peeling back the onion on myself and getting closer to the audience. So for me, I went out to go, let's produce a more personal episode. Also, it was tied into the news of like people are sort of, I've known all throughout my life, people have put down the South. People who've never been to the South, living in California, living in Chicago. People condescend to the South quite easily without having been there. And having gone back and forth my whole life, I've done some of that too, but at least I've been there, you know? So for me, it was about like, after the election, people are really condescending to the South. I think I can put a different spin on this because I've spent a lot of time there. But at the same time, I want to actually be more personal in the episode. People call me the host of United Shades, and it's like, I don't really feel like the host. I feel like it's just like, come have this adventure with me.
I wonder if you've ever had a place in the world, like a group in the world that you felt comfortable belonging to.
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a reason why I've like drawn a line in the sand and said I'm not moving out of the Bay Area again. Like I find a lot of my people here, you know. But honestly, when I feel most at home is probably in my house with my now 3 kids and my wife. Like it just feels like we all get each other, right? And I feel like it's good because I feel like I'm raising more black weirdos, like, which is awesome.
Do you have expectations for your kids? Do you want your kids to be achievers?
I mean, I think, you know, I mean, this is hard because every parent is, you know, totally biased, to use my own pun, in this area. But I feel like my kids have a really good sense of themselves. I mean, my youngest daughter is 9 weeks old. She's still figuring it out. But my oldest is 7 and the middle is 3.5. And I can already see who they are. Me and my wife talk about this all the time. Their personalities are pretty definite. I can already see areas in which they excel in. And for me, it's just about like trying to provide an environment through which they can learn about themselves and find out what they want to do. Like, that's what my mom did for me. I think if I lived with my dad the whole time, then I might be the second African-American insurance commissioner of Alabama. Like, I think if I had just stayed with him, we wouldn't be on this interview right now because I don't think you interview insurance commissioners. But, but I think it's funny, like, so for my mom, it was just like providing some bumpers so you don't like go into the gutter too much. It's like, and so like just sort of like making sure that you have a space to find yourself. And I'm lucky through like, you know, like my new baby who was just born, I call her the Janet Jackson of the family because she was born into a family that was doing well, whereas Sammy's like the Michael Jackson where it's like she was born into this family that was trying to do well. You know, like, so I feel like she using the privilege that I now have to sort of provide my kids with better opportunities, while at the same time, the only thing I really push for them is gratitude and empathy. That's all, because I feel like you can have all this privilege and you can be smart, and you can be good looking and popular, but if you don't have gratitude and empathy and a sense of generousness, then it doesn't mean anything. So that's the only thing I actually really, which is, I didn't imagine that about myself as a parent, that I'd be always talking about gratitude. But I think I'm so aware that in my career, I'm pretty grateful for the fact that it ended up this way, because you knew me for years when it was just like, I don't know what's going to happen with Kamau. You know, not that you thought a lot about it, but I was just another comic, you know. And so I'm very grateful about where I ended up. And so I feel like with my kids, it's sort of this sense of like, yeah, we don't deserve this. We have this. We don't deserve it. So we have to make sure we treat it well, and also use our privilege to help other people.
I loved the Sikh episode of your show. For one thing, I genuinely did not know that it was pronounced Sikh and not Sikh. So there's that.
Well, yeah, actually, I mean, there's members of the religion who still have to go back and forth and remind themselves. And you'll talk to older members of the community who still say Sikh. So it's like, you know, that's one of those things where it's if you're talking to a person who is a member of the community and they say Sikh, feel free to say Sikh.
You shot most of this episode in Yuba City, California.
Yep.
And that is like not that far from Los Angeles, where I live, or the Bay Area where you live.
No, it's less than 3 hours from where I live.
It is also an entirely different place.
Yeah, it's the Texas part of California. Like it's like all the things that like people associate. It's like the South. All the things people associate with California, as far as like liberals and lefties and Democrats and kale eaters, is not what's going on in the eastern part of California.
And it's pretty crazy to see a Sikh guy who is, you know, there's like these distinctive visual elements of being a Sikh, which is to say that you don't cut your beard, you don't cut your facial hair, and you wrap your hair, your head hair, which you don't cut, in a turban. But seeing someone like that also wearing a Western shirt, having a big belt buckle, and talking with a vaguely Southern accent,
yep,
is really a remarkable experience.
And talking about how they're a fourth generation American, and I'll take the credit. Like, it's just, even as somebody who's open and wants equity and inclusion, my brain has a hard time looking at somebody with a turban and a beard saying fourth generation American.
I want to play a clip from your most recent stand-up special, which is called Private School Negro. It's on Netflix now, and you're talking about what it's like to be a parent in the Trump era. At the time, I think you had 2 kids and 1 on the way. Now you have 3.
Yes.
And you start talking with more admiration than I've ever heard in your voice for anything ever about a television show called Doc McStuffins, which you basically say is top 3 with The Wire and The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Doc McStuffins is about a little black girl who's 6 years old, and she's a doctor for her stuffed animals and toys. And she wears a stethoscope, and it's magical, and when it makes a sound, all the toys come to life. They don't explain how it works. I don't know, voodoo, I don't know what it is. But when her toys have problems, like they break their arm or they're feeling tired, she tells them what to do. Like, you need to take a nap. Here's a cast. It's like, so she's actively being a doctor on the show as a 6-year-old black girl. Have I blown your mind yet? There's more. So it gets kids ready to go to the doctor, not afraid of the doctor, but it also teaches kids how to speak up for themselves in general. There was an episode about inappropriate touching. There was an episode where one of the stuffed animals was like, well, of course storms are getting worse. That's global warming. Holy Doc is more woke than our president.
So you're African American, your wife is white. So
No, I'm black. I'm not African American, I'm black.
Okay, you're black. Sorry, Kamau. You're black. Your wife is white.
Yes.
Your children are the biological children of you and your wife. They're mixed race.
Mm-hmm.
What is it like to have one intimate family member, your wife who's white, and have kids who, just by the nature of how race works in America, will live their whole lives essentially as black? Like, are there things about that black experience that you have to communicate with your wife in order to help guide your kids?
I mean, luckily, Melissa, my wife, she's an academic. She's got a PhD. I talked about that in my last special. Semi-prominent Negro, because I love the word Negro. So she very much, we were together for 9 years before we were married, and then 10 years before, 12 years before we had Sammy, our oldest daughter. So we'd already had these conversations. It's also the same as, like, I'm the only man in the household. So it's like, there's also this, like, there's one male and 3 females. So there's, like, things I have to know about. So it's like, we go back and forth on this. It's not like I have to, there's times we sat down and talked about things. There's times where we, talked about race and we talk about racism. And sometimes I think I'm a little more interested in pushing the conversation than Melissa is, because I think she's more sensitive to, like, she's 7. And I'm just like, she's got to know. But, so there's things you negotiate, but all parents negotiate these types of things. But, like, Sammy's very aware that she's mixed, very aware that she's black. Juno, who's 3.5, who's actually much lighter skinned than Sammy, doesn't really understand herself as a black person yet. And maybe her skin color will never catch up to a shade where white people will perceive her as black. I think black people will, because we know how to sort of sniff that out. But I think she will have to know that that's a part of her identity. But it is interesting to go, I don't know where Juno's going to end up in her shade. She's still pretty light. And when we're with each other, I'm like, we just traveled for the first time together, just the two of us. And I'm not sure that people were always aware that she was my daughter. Now, I don't worry about that, or I try not to. But I think a lot of these questions will reveal themselves over time, just because their life experience is going to be so different than me and Melissa's. The thing I think is great is that in the 21st century, the mixed race conversation is so much further along than it was when I was a kid, that we have a lot of resources and a lot of friends to talk this through who will be smarter about it than their parents.
What about the show are you the most proud of?
I'm most proud of the fact that when we do the best version of the show, that the people who are covered in the show then can use the show as a way to help lift the weight of prejudice. So, for example, the Sikh show is the best example of that. Like, we really worked closely with them, even like re-recording some of the pronunciation, which is still not great, but just to go, they were like, you could do a better job of pronouncing some of these words. And so that, like, it's not just like a journalist goes in and just tells the story and leaves, but it's really important to me as somebody who's going in as a human who happens to have the job of comedian to serve the community in a way that they can actually point to it and go, if you want to know more about us, go to this thing. So, for example, the San Quentin episode in the first season that you played a clip of is a great example of that. We screened that episode in San Quentin. We took it back there, and I was super nervous because what if they just hated it? And throughout the episode, they just clapped and cheered and laughed, and it felt like, and I got a standing ovation. It was like one of the most, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now. Just the fact that they felt like finally somebody actually sees us and is letting us tell our story. So to me, that's my favorite thing about the show, is when we get it right. And my least favorite thing is when we get it wrong and those communities come back and go, that's not what it is. And then I feel like, well, we need to go back and try better.
Well, Kamau, congratulations on all the success on the show. Congratulations on your Emmy nomination this year. And I'm so glad for all of it. It's really well deserved.
No, and right back to you. I really appreciate the fact that we were once at UC Santa Cruz in a college radio station talking about what was going to happen, and we're actually doing those things.
In an actual weird forest.
Yes, in a forest on a hill.
Thanks, bud.
Thank you.
W. Kamau Bell. His show, United Shades of America, is available to stream right now on Hulu. It's also nominated for an Emmy. You can find out if it won next month.